this will save my voice. Well, I want to thank Penny for inviting me here. I met her quite a year ago. We were discussing that. Gotta get my magic clicker here. I am from the Limberlost State Historic Site, and we're part of the Indiana State Museum and Historic Site System. What we do there is preserve Gene Stratton Porter's Limberlost legacy, and that's both the Limberlost cabin where she lived and wrote, and also you'll see up there, let me find the laser pointer here, there we go, the natural areas that she wrote about and photographed, like the Limberlost Swamp. Mind anybody's waving? Everybody can see, okay, I don't want to stand in this guy's way here to be mad. All right, we are located in Geneva, which is known as the land of the Limberlost. And if you don't know where that is, we are right there, almost to the Ohio border over there. And this is our visitor center that we built 10 years ago. It's at the site where the Limberlost cabin is. We give tours of the Limberlost cabin. There's a beautiful sunset view of it. And this is a glimpse inside the Limberlost cabin. If y'all want to see more of it, you got to come and take a tour with us. Right? That's a teaser. That's what's called a teaser. Now, the reason we're there is because of this woman, a native daughter of Wabash County. 100 years ago, Gene Stratton Porter was one of Indiana's most famous citizens. She was actually one of the most famous women in the United States. And she was an author, a naturalist, a nature photographer, and later in life, when she went out to California, she even became a movie producer. So if you think you know Gene Stratton Porter, you probably don't, because this woman had a lot going on in her life. And I put this up here. This is a quote from a woman, an author, Eleanor Cameron, on how the Limberlost novels that Gene wrote helped her develop a strong conservation ethic. Conservation, you're all here interested in conservation. We've seen these awards being presented to folks. And I'm going to read this to you real quick. Eleanor says that perhaps it all harks back in some respect to my wholehearted response when I was 10 and 11. Gene Stratton Porter's intensely felt sense of place. As another example of that, we've got another author, Ronnie Giff, on reading the Limberlost, Limberlost, when she was 10 years old. Even the names in the book were old-fashioned and lovely. Elnora, the town of Wabash, and then, of course, the Limberlost. What a magical place. I could see those huge moths, the emperor butterflies, the trees, the beauty of this mythical place. What I found interesting, I've worked at the Limberlost for 11 years now, is that very often girls at the age of 10, 11, or 12, that's when they first read A Girl of the Limberlost, and it makes a huge impact on them. Now, we were featured March of 2020 at Limberlost in Smithsonian Magazine. And if you look at the very top, oops, I hit the wrong thing there. I'm still learning this remote. There, it says America's Unsung Naturalist. And on the inside, there's a wonderful article called The Legend of Limberlost. It's all about Gene Stratton Porter and the Limberlost and the nature preserves that are being restored in our area. And there's a photograph of one, Loveline Marsh, our first and most heavily used nature preserve right outside Geneva. Also, you'll see on this page, there's a list of women naturalists and scientists who Gene Stratton Porter, by writing about nature the way she did, helped pave the way for these women to actually do their thing years later, including, some of y'all may know of this woman, Rachel Carson, who wrote the book Silent Spring and helped usher in the modern environmental era. Now, there's another picture of one of our nature preserves here. That's Rainbow Bend Park. And there's a really big sycamore tree there. You see the base of it. And see that skinny old naturalist standing there in that picture? Guess who that is? It's one of those good news, bad news things. The good news is I got my picture in Smithsonian Magazine. The bad news is you can't tell it's me. I have to point it out, right? Yeah, well, hey, it's still a good thing. And by the way, that was the March 2020 issue of Smithsonian, and as of, well, this is March now, as of last month, we still have people coming to visit with us who said they came because they read that article. It gave us tremendous exposure. Now, another more recent famous magazine, New Yorker, this is July 4th, this last year, had an article by a Pulitzer Prize winning author, Annie Proulx. She wrote an article about called Swamp, Why America's Wetlands Matter. And in this article, she features a few wetlands, just a few out of the whole country, and Limberlost is one of those featured wetlands. And you see, I've got it outlined up there. And in fact, at the start of the section on Limberlost, Annie Proulx talks about her mother's favorite book when she was, when her mother was a teenage girl in the 1920s, was Gene Stratton Porter's A Girl of the Limberlost. So we still, to this day, have an impact on modern writers, including our next one I want to mention because she's the most famous one of all, Harry Potter. J.K. Rowling, who writes those wonderful Harry Potter books the kids go crazy for. In 1999, she was publicizing her first Harry Potter book, and she wanted to encourage children to read in general, not just her books, so she listed her 5 favorite books she read when she was a girl growing up over there in Great Britain. Right there is A Girl of the Limberlost by Gene Stratton Porter. And even better than that, in May of 2020, on J.K. Rowling's Twitter account, the world was on lockdown at that point from the coronavirus, so she was stuck at home like everybody was, and she says that a few nights ago, I picked up A Girl of the Limberlost again, which I last read when I was 10 or 11. She said that it rekindled her ambition she had as a child to visit the Limberlost, and so she tweets, I guess that's how you say it, she tweeted, has anyone got pictures of it they've taken, has anyone who follows me lived near it? Well, a woman in Bern, just a few miles north of Geneva, she tweeted back and said, I live 10 minutes north of it. The trails are a bit damp since the spring, but the house she wrote in includes a fantastic tour. J.K. Rowling tweets back, thank you so much for this. You can visit her house. I'm definitely going. Well, we're still waiting. But we have hope. We have hope that one day J.K. Rowling will walk through the door and want a tour of the Limberlost. So, she says she's definitely going. I'm going to trust to her word. All right, now, one last thing just to show you how we reach Gene and the Limberlost reach all over. A few years back, Southern Living magazine, on their online version, decided to have what they call the Ultimate 50 States Reading List. So they selected one book from every state that they thought best represented that state. And for Indiana, you see here that it was a book called The Stone Diaries by Carol Shields, who won a Pulitzer Prize. Good for her. Now, at the bottom, also they list a few other books they think represents Indiana. And look right here, I've got it in blue, Freckles and A Girl of the Limberlost by Gene Stratton Porter. To this very day, there's still a feeling that those books, Gene's books, represent our state. All right, now let's talk about this woman. Geneva Grace Stratton Porter, born August 17, 1863, right here in Wabash County, and died December 6, 1924. Now you notice her full name was Geneva. And where's the land of the Limberlost? Geneva. There is no connection between those two names. When Gene Stratton Porter moved there in 1888, it was pure coincidence that she came to live in a town with the same name. Most people assume, well, they named the town after her, or she was named after the town. Not the case. Now here's some photographs of her in various stages of her life. And first of all, that's what she would look like when she was living on the Hopewell farm over there north of the Grove. She's about 11 years old there. Here she's a teenager living right here in Wabash. Here she's a young married woman, just 1 year married there, living in Decatur in Adams County. Here she is at the Limberlost cabin where I work. That's a picture of her when she was 40, when she published her first book. There she is living up in Rome City at the Limberlost cabin north of Wildflower Woods. And there she is later in life when she was living out in California. So that's Gene's world, and you see here how long she lived in each spot. 11 years north of the Grove on the farm, Then the family moved into Wabash. She lived here about 12 years. A couple of years in Decatur after she married. A long time in Geneva, 25 years. 6 years, and that may be stretching it a bit, up in Rome City. And finally in California, which is more like 4 years out in California. So these are the areas she lived during her lifetime. And what I'm going to do, especially for this program today, is talk about Wabash County and her life here. Now, there's a map of Wabash County in 1861. And we've got on my pointer, there's LaGros Township, there's the city of LaGros right there, and then a few miles north is the farm that Mark Stratton bought, and Bobby told y'all how that came to be from his great, I forget how many great-grandfathers. Now we're going to zoom in a little bit and take a look at the farm a little bit closer. There's LaGros right there, and there's the Wabash River down here, and there's the Stratton farm right up there, 240-acre farm. We're going to zoom in again, and now you can see clearly that Mark Stratton owned the farm there, north of LaGros. There's a road that runs through it north to south. There's LaGros Creek, it runs right through his property. There is a schoolhouse that was built on the property there. And I also want you to notice up here, Josiah Pratt, the Pratt property that abuts the northern side of the Stratton property. Just remember that name, Pratt. We're going to talk about that shortly. And Bob, you said Russell was, yeah, I noticed Russell was up there too. More relation?
Yeah.
There you go. All right, well, this is what the house looked like that Gene Stratton Porter was born in, known as the Hopewell House, because the farm was called Hopewell Farm. It was called Pleasant Valley when it first got going a long time ago. At some point when the Strattons were there, it became known as Hopewell because the Stratton family was descended from England, and so that was a British ancestral home named Hopewell. And there's the schoolhouse and the church that was built there. The church is still around. I think many of y'all know that. The church bell tower there is not around anymore. I went out there today before I came here. I went through LaGros and I went up by Hopewell, and then I went to downtown Wabash. I spent a few hours down there before I came here. I had a good time. Went to the library, looked around, went to the museum, looked around there, talked to some folks. I went to Modoc's, of course, and had some coffee. Learned all about the rampaging elephant. And, let's see. I went to the reading room, used bookstore. Oh my gosh. I almost fainted when I walked in. There were so many books, so I spent most of the time there. Now, this is a map drawn by a woman named Mary Ethel Brumfeld, but as described to her by one of Gene's sisters, Ada Wilson. So Ada lived there, of course, with Gene on the farm. So this is what she described. Now, this map's a little bit bizarre because at the top of the map, that's east. So north is over to your left. That's just the way it was drawn, otherwise you can't read the words. So just think of north that way. So that road that runs through there is north and south, and the LaGros Creek up there is going from south to north. Let's zoom in a little bit here. Now you can see, again, the road running through there, and then the cemetery that Bobby was talking about, the church. There's LaGros Creek going up through there. And there's the actual house, the homestead, the Hopewell House right through there. And I'm going to zoom in again. And now you can see in a little more detail. There's the house and things like their garden and the orchard, and there's the pig pen and the woodlot, all the things a good farm ought to have back in those days. And then this is a drawing that Mrs. Brumfeld drew of the Hopewell house. You saw the photograph of it. There's a drawing of it. And now we're going to take a peek inside the house. And this is the floor plan. First floor, Hopewell house, the sitting room, and kitchen, and dining room, and bedrooms, and a parlor. And then upstairs, they got the boys' room and the girls' room. Now, Gene was the last of 12 children, so it was a big family. They needed lots of bedrooms. Although 2 of the children did die when they were young, and you'll learn more about that in just a second. So they weren't weren't all their 12 children there at the same time. In fact, Jean's oldest sister was 24 years older than she was. Jean Stratton Porter was a surprise. The family had had 11 kids, and they thought that was it. And then 5 years later, surprise, here comes Geneva Grace. Now, while the Strattons were living at Hopewell Farm, and I mentioned already a couple, they lost 4 of their children, unfortunately. Louisa Jane died in 1851. She was only 9. She died of whooping cough. Samira died in 1852. She was only 6, and she died of scarlet fever. And then, so Jean never knew those sisters. But while Jean was still living on the farm, one of her older sisters, Mary Ann, died in 1872 at the age of 32 as a result of injuries obtained in a railway accident 3 years earlier. I'm not sure what those injuries were, but they apparently were enough that 3 years later she finally succumbed to them at a very young age. And about the last of the kids who died while they were living on the farm, whoops, I just screwed that up, wrong button. This is not my normal, I'm just using a borrowed clicker, so I don't know what I'm doing up there. So, Leander Stratton, whose nickname was Laddie, he died in 1872 in the summer, just a few months after Mary Ann died. At the age of 19, he drowned in the Wabash River. Jean Stratton Porter loved Laddie. She was her favorite brother. She just adored him. It crushed her. It destroyed her when he drowned. Now I got the right button. Now here's the Hopewell Cemetery, and this particular picture you can see in the back there. There's the church, and this is the Stratton plot right through here. And amongst other Stratton family members there, you will find Mark and Mary, the mother and father, and then Leander Laddie is buried there. But so is Mary Ann and Ada and Samira, Louisa Jane. They're all buried there in their plot. Now, let's talk about Laddie. One of you all are going to take this book home tonight, I understand. And Jean herself called it a true blue story. This book is very autobiographical. It is a work of fiction. It's a novel, but Jean herself said about 75% of it is true. And here's a dust jacket from a copy of Laddie. And you see there's the character who tells the story of Laddie. It's called Little Sister. She's the youngest child of a family of 12 living in Indiana. Wabash. So it's all about Little Sister and her older brother Laddie and the woman he loves, who's nicknamed by Little Sister the Princess. And the dedication of the book is to Leander Elliott Stratton. The way to be happy is to be good. And here you see an illustration from a first edition of Laddie. It shows the princess on her horse, and there's Little Sister right there talking to her. This was a big seller for Jean Stratton Porter. In Jean Stratton Porter's 21 years of writing books while she was alive, she sold about 10 million around the world. She broke records selling books around the world. And you see Laddie in 5 months' time sold 302,000 copies in just 5 months. It was a big hit. And in fact, in 1913, it was number 3 on the top 10 bestseller list. So it made its way all the way up to number 3. Now, Jean herself says about this book, I could write no truer biography. For the contour of hill and field to the last stripe on the wallpaper and knot on the door, that is the home in which I was born. The book also was somewhat of a wish fulfillment for her beloved brother Laddie, since in the book, and I'm not giving away anything but this, in the book he does not drown. This is what she wished her brother's life had been like instead of dying in the Wabash River. Now, because it's so autobiographical, the characters in the book equate to real people. And we're going to run down this list because I think it's very interesting. So if you don't think it's interesting, bear with me. First of all, on the left-hand side are the characters from the book Laddie. On the right, real-life counterparts, as you can see. So Laddie was Leander, whose real nickname was Laddie. I've already said his little sister was Jean. The princess in the book is called Pamela Pryor. In real life, Amelia Pratt was the woman who was the model for the princess, and in fact, Leander was engaged to her when he drowned. Now, next you'll see we've got Mr. and Mrs. Stanton in the book, are in fact Mark and Mary Stratton, the parents. The brother Leon is in real life Lemon, just take that M right out of there, and you have Leon. Then you'll see that the character of the sister Sally was her sister Mary Ann, who went by the nickname Molly. So Molly, Sally, pretty close. Her sister in the book Shelley was her real sister Florence Schellenbarger, so that's where Shelley came from. In the book May is her real sister Ada, whose middle name was May. In the book Elizabeth, described as the oldest sister, her real oldest sister was Catherine Elizabeth. In the book Jerry is Jerome. Frank is her brother Irvin Franklin. Lucy is her sister Anastasia Lucella. And Groveville is LeGros. not really disguising it all that much, was she? But she did, just a tiny bit. All right. Now, just to show you a few pictures of her real siblings. There's her sister Ada, who was May. There's her sister Florence, who was Shelley, as young women. And here we have Jean and the three surviving sisters in 1924. There's Jean Stratton Porter. There's her older sister, Catherine. There's Florence, and there's Ada, out in California. Here we have her brother Lemon as a young man, and there's her brother Irvin as a young man. Here we have her brother Jerry as an older man with Florence and Ada as older women. Now, I took this quote here directly out, word for word, out of this book some of y'all might be familiar with, Pioneer Days of the Wabash Valley. And in this book, it talks about Miss Amelia Pratt, daughter of Joseph Pratt, who was a Hopewell pioneer, is the Miss Pryor, the princess in the story, and lived on the nearby farm. Now, there you go. Remember I said the Pratt farm was on the north side of Stratton Farm. Well, there, exactly what it says. Both these young people, they're talking about Laddie and Amelia. Is it Pamelia or Pamelia? Oh, yeah, who knows that? Pamelia? Pamelia? No? It's an old name, yes. Both these young people were born in the year 1852. Pamelia was fond of horses and a good rider. Her favorite mount, one she often rode in celebrations and at rallies, was a roan-colored animal of fine metal. There's a word you don't hear anymore, metal. Pamelia married a young man by the name of Prune. They lie buried side by side in the IOF cemetery at LeGros. She died in 1917. I stopped by the cemetery and kind of drove through, but there's a lot of folks buried there, so I was not able to find it. It'd take a while probably to find it, or I have to get a directory of the cemetery. Now, I do want to mention this real quick because it's important stuff. Underground Railroad. The Strattons actually were part of the Underground Railroad, and in the book Laddie, it's mentioned. Here are some things I'll read to you real quick from the book itself. Some quotes from the book. This is little sister and her brother Leon. They're out looking around. We slid from the fence and ran into a queer hollow that was cut into the hill between the Neverfail and Baldwin apple trees. You know, I've always had my suspicions about this place, said Leon. There is somewhere on our land that people can be hidden for a long time. Leon continues. Once I was awake in the night, heard voices. It made me want to drink, so I went downstairs for it and ran right into the biggest, blackest man who ever grew. If Father and Mother hadn't been there, I would have been scared into fits. Next morning, he wasn't gone, and there wasn't a whisper. Father said I'd had bad dreams. What did they have a black man for? Asked little sister. They were helping him run away from slavery to be free in Canada. It was all right. I'd have done the same thing. They helped a lot. And Leon continues. I think this farm was what they called an underground station. What I want to know is where the station was. So little sister says, maybe it's here. Let's hunt, I said. If the black men were here sometime, they would have had to be fed, and this is not too far from the house. So we took long sticks and began poking into the weeds. Then we moved the brush, and as sure as you live, we found an old door with a big stone against it. I looked at Leon and he looked at me. They had found the hidden room where they kept the runaway slaves. So that's just a sample. Whoever y'all wins that book tonight, you're going to read more. There's more in there about that in Latin. All right. Now, the Sprattons lived on the Hopewell farm until Gene was 11. At that time, they moved into the city of Wabash, and this is a map from 1861. And that was 1874 when they moved. And the reason for the move is that Gene's mother was very, very ill. She needed lots of care and attention. And before we go on further into that, I just want to point out that, as I say, the Porters, except, you got a woman named Stratton Porter. Sometimes you get confused about who you're talking about. The Strattons moved into Wabash in 1874. So I've got the population in 1870 and 1880. You see, it went up almost 1,000 people in those 10 years. And then LeGros went up almost 100 people in those 10 years. Now, when the Sprattons moved into Wabash, they moved in with one of Gene's older married sisters, Anastasia, whose married name was Taylor. Now, what you see here is prominent business houses and professional firms in Wabash, Indiana, 1861, and Alva Taylor, attorney at law of Wabash, Indiana. So they moved in with the Taylors, Anastasia and her husband, Alva. Now, actually, before I get into this, I want to tell y'all something weird that happened today, okay? I told you I went to the library. And so I went to the genealogy section, and just kind of nosing around, looking for anything that might be interesting. And I'm just looking over the shelves, and I see a book that says, The Trails, or Early Indiana Trails and Sketches. And I thought, trails, that might be interesting. I'll look at it. So I get it down, I open it up, on the inside it said, Early Indiana Trials and Sketches. And I'm like, oh no, this is a law book. But as I was just kind of starting to put it away, closing it up, I noticed on an interior page some writing. The owner of the book, who had apparently first purchased it, I'm thinking, had signed his name and the date that he must have purchased it. The name was Alva Taylor, and the date was September 1st, 1860. Now, that freaked me out, because I thought it was about trails. I wasn't looking for any law book, and yet that one book that I mistakenly took off the shelf was connected to the very talk I'm giving tonight. So if y'all know the Twilight Zone theme, you can do it now, right? Yeah, because that was kind of Twilight Zone-ish to me. All right, now let's talk about the Wabash chronology. The Strattons living here in your town that we're in now. All right, so in October 1874, the parents, Mark and Mary, with the son Lemon, 3 daughters, Florence, Ada, and Jean, moved in with another daughter, Anastasia, as we said, her husband, Alva Taylor, and their 2 children. And Brother Irvin was already living there. Don't bother to count, I'll tell you. 11. It's 11 people in that house. Yeah, I would not have lived there. 4 months later, Mary died, the mother. She passed away, as we talked about. She died from typhoid. And at that time, her widowed husband, Mark, 3 daughters, moved down the street to a rented house. Irvin was still in with Anastasia, so was Lemon. Then sometime before 1880, Irvin moved out. I'm not sure when, I just know by 1880, Irvin was gone from that household. He's not listed in the 1880 census. But Lemon is. Lemon's still there, but, whoops, here I am again, hitting the wrong button. I'm going ahead. All right. So in 1882, in October, Sister Florence married Will Compton and moved out. And then the next year, Anastasia, whose house they moved into, dies of cancer. And she was only 45. Then, in September, Sister Ada married Franklin Wilson, and she and her husband, along with Father Mark and Jean, moved back in with Alva and the 2 children. Lemon's still living there. But within a month, Lemon marries Alice Lowry and moves out. 2 months later, Jean slips on ice in downtown Wabash. She falls, cracks her skull, was unconscious for a while. The family despaired for her life. But after 3 months' time, she was able to walk with the use of a cane. So that was a close call for Jean. Then, the next year, Alva remarries. So, they had Mark, Ada and her husband, and Jean moved back down the street again. And see, it's hard to follow. I know I get confused, and I've been the one who researched it all. Then, just a few months later, the summer of 1884, Jean, who's still using a cane to walk, she goes with some of her sisters, I think it was Ada and Florence, to Rome City, to the Chautauqua that's held during the summer, and a young man named Charles D. Porter favorably notices her. Yeah, he sees this unusual woman who is 14 years younger than him, and walking around with a cane, but he sees her and he's struck, and he's asked around, who is she? And he finds out her name, he finds out where she lives, so he starts writing to her. And they write back and forth, fall, winter, and spring, and then the following year, summer of 1885, they meet in person for the first time at the next Chautauqua, and they're engaged within a few months. By October, then the following spring, they wed April 21st, 1886, at her sister Ada's home, 112 Hill Street in Wabash. That's the only actual address I've found from any of these other homes we've been talking about. That's just some more research. I need to come over here to the courthouse or something and do a little more research. So, Charles and Jean wed. The newlyweds moved into Charles's boyhood home in Decatur, in Adams County, where I'm from, over there. And Jean's 22 years and 8 months of living in Wabash County come to an end. And Jean lived in Adams County about 27 years. So she lived just a little bit longer in Adams than Wabash. Wabash has got a solid number 2, because nowhere else did Jean come close to living those lengths of time as she did in Adams County and Wabash County. So obviously those two counties, our two counties, had a huge impact on her life. So there is a special focus on Wabash County. Now we're going to complete the story of her life, and you're going to see just what this amazing woman did. And if I run over or something, just let me know. Make this motion, you know. All right, well, there are 2 Jean Stratford homes that are state historic sites. Limberlost, where I work, down in Geneva, and the one that some of y'all I know have been telling me have seen, the one right in Rome City, over just outside Rome City on Sylvan Lake, and that's the Jean Stratford State Historic Site. And then this is the home that she built when she went out to California. That's her summer home. She was one of the richest women in the country by this time. And that's a summer home she built on Catalina Island. That's a postcard from her era. Then, that is the mansion she built in Bel Air. Yeah, I told you she was rich. Y'all didn't believe me. You do now, right? Well, she built that in Bel Air, New Los Angeles neighborhood at the time. She never lived in it. She never lived in this home. She was going to move into it in the middle of December of 1924, and just a short time before she was going to move. On December 6, 1924, she was killed in a car accident in Los Angeles, just a few blocks from her home. Her chauffeured vehicle was struck by a streetcar. She was only 61 years old. So she never lived in that fabulous mansion in Bel Air. The good news is her daughter lived there for about 10 years with her family. Speaking of her daughter, during our tour we talked about Jean's family. Her daughter Jeanette, who Jean nicknamed Molly Cotton. And there is a picture of Jeanette and, see if I get this right this time, the music room in the Limberlost cabin, in the front yard of Limberlost cabin, playing with a neighbor child. And Jean's husband was known by the town folks as the Deacon, because he looked like that, right? Yeah. So she writes about the Deacon. She never calls him Charles when she writes about him. It's always the Deacon. So there's the Deacon. He was a local businessman. And he had a number of different ventures in Geneva. He had a drugstore, the Old Reliable Drugstore. He had the Shamrock Hotel. He had the Geneva Bank. He helped get that bank started. And he had a 240-acre farm. All the farmers in here, Charles Porter was a farmer, but he didn't do the work. He had people who did it for him. He just reaped the benefits. He had that farm 1.5 miles west of Geneva. He had crops, cattle, and when oil was discovered in the Limberlost area, guess whose farm was sitting smack dab on oil? He did not buy the farm after the oil was discovered. Oil was discovered years after he bought the farm. You know, hard work is good. We should all work hard. But luck is even better. He was very, very lucky. And here's a picture Gene took of him in the Geneva Bank. If y'all come to visit with us down there in Geneva, see that safe in the vault back in there? If y'all come to visit with us, we've got it sitting in our visitor center right there, the original Geneva Bank safe. Now, what did Jean publish? She was a busy, busy woman. 174 separate magazine publications. When you think of Jean Stratton Porter, magazine does not pop into your head. But she was a very important magazine writer. 12 novels, 8 nature books, 3 major poetic works, 2 books for children. During her time, she had at least 50 million readers. But by the way, the population of the U.S. around then was about 100 million. This is a list of the magazines that she did publish in. And this is a list of the books that she wrote. Now, this is on a free card we give out to everybody who comes to visit with us. And we divide them into her novels, her nature studies, a couple things she did for kids, and some of the poems and essays. And these are covers over here from some of her novels, and there's Laddie again down there. And over here we have covers from some of her nature books, one of her children's books, and one of her poetry books. We also list, as you'll see, the years they were published. Now on the back side, well, wait a minute, let's see. I gotta remember what I wrote. Okay, let's talk about how big she was, all right? Everybody loves the bestseller. You know, you're a best-selling author. Jean Stratton Porter was a best-selling author 7 different times on the top 10 bestseller list. In 1911, she caught on with the public big time. Number 5, The Harvester in 1911, and went to number 1, best-selling fiction book in the United States, 1912. Good old Laddie, number 3, as I mentioned. Michael Halloran did number 3 2 years later. A Daughter of the Land made number 9 in 1918. Her Father's Daughter, number 8 in 1921. Keeper of the Bees made number 3 in 1925. Now, you'd say, where's Freckles and Grove and Limberlost, her 2 most famous books? They were published before she caught on. So they never reached the top 10. But over time, they were the 2 best sellers to this date. There's 2 best sellers. Now take a look at this here. In a survey done in 1935 of the best-selling books from 1885 to 1935, of the top 20 best-selling books, 4 were written by Jean. Freckles, Grove and Limberlost, The Harvester, Laddie. No other author on that list had even 2 books. That's astonishing. That's how popular she was. Nature was a theme in most of her books. She says she wrote pot boilers, you know, something that people want to read. Romance, action, adventure, you know, conflict, whatever people like to read about, but she stuffed them full of nature. So that people who wouldn't normally read a nature book got a heavy dose of nature. It's kind of like a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. Well, the sugar was the pot boiler and the medicine was the nature stuff. And yet people who didn't really think much about nature read her descriptions of nature and fell in love with nature. Jean was known as the Bird Woman. She wrote herself into Freckles and Grove and Limberlost as the character Bird Woman. And this is what she looked like. This is an original illustration from a first edition of Freckles. And the artist who drew this picture of her with her swamp clothing on, he stayed at the Limberlost cabin for, a week or 10 days drawing what he saw. So this is what she did look like when she went out and about. Women weren't dressing like that at that time. Women weren't doing that at that time. These are the languages that her works that we know of. There may be some others we're not even aware of, that she was translated to, and Braille. And I want you to notice this language here, Arabic. A Girl of the Limberlost was the first English language book ever translated to Arabic. First time. So since she was read around the world, she carried the Limberlost name around the world. Here's just a few examples. Right? Limberlost Dairy, Tasmania, Australia. Limberlost Strawberries, Stellenbosch, South Africa. Limberlost Bus Station in England. Limberlost Lodge in Huntsville, Canada. I've compiled a list of 120 places and things throughout history from this time she wrote that have the name Limberlost in them. 120. And we're still discovering things, or things are still being added to the list. Now, she was also a very famous nature photographer. She was an award-winning photographer, won national awards, was the camera editor for national magazines, and she took pictures of birds in ways no one had ever done before. No one had ever gotten pictures like this before. She was the first to do things like this. Now, there's a cute little bunny. I threw that in because look at what she's captured in that picture. Mollycock. Well, at that time period, there was a popular poem about rabbits, and the little bunnies were called mollycocks. That's where she got the nickname for her daughter, Mollycock. I'm going to read this to you. It's kind of a cute little poem. She liked to make these fun little poems in this book, Music of the Wild, her nature book. After lunch, I wash my face and go to have a romp with other little cocktails down in the Limberlost swamp. So she had a real knack for just little 4-line, cute little poems that she thought people would like. Now, she used her own nature photographs in her nature books, with a few rare exceptions, but in those days there was no color photography. And yet you open up books like Mars of the Limberlost, you see color pictures. What she did was take some of her own black and white photographs, like that caterpillar, and she hand painted them herself with watercolors. When that book went to the publisher, she had painted 22 pictures in it, 22. And some of her bird books also had color pictures. So she was also an artist. And this gets overlooked more than it should, and we're guilty of it at Limberlost. This woman there's so much to talk about with her. She was a very important conservationist. One person, back in her time period, when she was still alive, said that she was next maybe to Teddy Roosevelt as far as promoting conservation in the United States. Because she was so popular. And this is a famous quote from Music of the Wild, where she is more or less, in a way, predicting, she's saying, man can change and is changing the forces of nature. She was cautioning that what humans were doing was going to cause problems, and we're seeing that happening nowadays. So even though she was not a trained biologist, in fact, she quit high school when she was a senior, never got her diploma. But she read widely, she was very intelligent. It wouldn't surprise me if she was a genius level, and she could figure things out on her own, like that. Now, the very first thing she ever published was a magazine article expressing her concern over women's hats that had bird feathers in them, because those birds were being slaughtered. You'd shoot a heron, you'd pull a couple feathers out of it, leave the rest of it to rot. So she didn't like that, so she wrote an article called A New Experience in Millinery, the first article ever published under her name, February 1900, Recreation Magazine. And so she was among the first group inducted into the Indiana Conservation Hall of Fame when it was created in 2009. Now, here's what most people don't know. She was a movie producer. When she went to California, because she had a lot of money and liked to do things her way, she started her own movie production company, Gene Stratporter Productions. So that way she could turn her books into movies her way, nobody else. I admire that about her. She had the money to do it, so she did it. And the whole idea was to turn, as I said, her books into movies, and she was one of the first women to ever start a movie company. There's a list. This is the back of the card we give away if y'all come to visit with us at Limberlost. And that's a list of all the movies ever been made of any Gene Stratporter book. 23 movies are listed up there, from 9 of her novels. Not many authors can say they've had 23 or more movies made of their works. That's amazing. And you'll see, if you look closely at the list here, that 5 of them were made by her movie company, 2 under her direct supervision, 3 after she died. And these are just a variety of movie posters from some of the movies over the years. This is a still from the 1934 version of Girl of the Limberlost, done not by Gene's company, but it's a good version. If you ever all have to see that one, it's worth watching. And then over here is a 1940 version of Laddie. And there's Little Sister. And the young actress who portrays Little Sister in that movie, she went on 4 years later. Some of y'all may like this movie, I do. She went on 4 years later to star with Judy Garland in Meet Me at St. Louis. And that's a good one. And most of you see that at Christmas time. And then the actor who portrays Laddie there, he went on to have a long Hollywood career. Almost 80 movies he did in his lifetime. Probably the most famous one, and some of y'all like old movies like I do, may know this one. He was one of the main stars of Treasure of the Sierra Madre with Humphrey Bogart, very famous movie. So he had a really great career. Also, by the way, in his later years, when he wasn't quite the active young man, he started one of my all-time favorite bad monster movies called The Monster That Challenged the World. And he was the hero, so he was still good at it. The monster was so-so, but he was pretty good. Now here's a version of Freckles done by Gene's production company after her death. And the young woman there portraying the main character in the book, if you've not read Freckles, that's the Swamp Angel. And this actress, her name is Jean Stratton Monroe. That's one of Gene's granddaughters. She actually acted in 3 of the movies done based on her grandmother's work after her death. And that's what Gene looked like when she was out in California. Went around in what she called her boots and breeches outfit. So she was definitely dressing in a way women just weren't doing in those days. And when she died, this is just an example of 2 newspaper articles from that time period. It was felt around the world. She was famous around the world, loved around the world. I particularly want to show you all this line here. The news of her death in her prime will bring sorrow to many young hearts and to many American homes. So it was a big deal when she was killed in the car accident. Now, let's just, for a few minutes here, talk about Limberlost, because Gene made it famous. You can go to South Africa to see the name Limberlost, Australia, New Zealand, places like that. So, where did that name come from? Well, this is going to sound weird, but it's true. These are the 2 best, you're going to read a lot of different versions of this. These are the 2 best researched and probably, well, almost certainly true. One's certainly true, the other is almost certainly true. But in 1820, when the state surveyor was asking local folks about things in Jay County, just south of Adams County there, he was pointing to things on the map, and he says, "What do you call this creek?" And a guy whose name was Limber Jim Miller said, "Name it after me. I got lost there once." So the surveyor wrote down, this is on a piece of paper down in Indianapolis, Limber Lost Creek. So that, in 1820, first time the words Limberlost were ever known. But 20 years later, in the swamp just south of Geneva, mostly in Adams County, a 16-year-old boy who was tall and skinny, and his name was James. So guess what? Everybody's calling him Limber Jim. And he went hunting with his father. He got separated. The other hunters couldn't find him. They come home to the village to get help to go look for him. So they're running around town. Limber's lost! Limber's lost! So they go out. It takes 3 days to find him, but they did. He was hungry and scared. They got him back home. And now not only the creek was known as Limberlost, but the swamp became known as Limberlost too. I don't know if I want to be famous for being lost. That's kind of infamy, not fame. And Jean herself wrote about the Limberlost. This is the first line in the book was of the Limberlost, a nature book. To me, the Limberlost is a word with which to conjure a spot wherein to revel. And she herself describes it as the swamp lies in northeastern Indiana, nearly 100 miles south of the Michigan line, and 10 west of the Ohio, and that's exactly where we're at right over there, southern Adams County is Geneva, and the Limberlost extends into northern Jay County. And this is a picture Jean took of it, and it's titled At the Edge of the Limberlost. So that's what it looked like in her day. And this is a map that shows that there was at least 13,000 acres of wetlands, at least 20 square miles. And you'll see that Geneva is here. So the big Limberlost Swamp was just south of town. And then the Lobline Marsh area was over here. And the floodplain of the Wabash River is just to the east. Now, as Jean was writing about the Limberlost and making it world famous, it was being destroyed. It was progress, development in those days. Wetlands were being destroyed right and left. Three industries were the main culprits. They drained it for agriculture. They cut down the trees for lumber, and as I mentioned, there was an oil boom there that started in the early 1890s. Now, this wasn't a little oil boom. Jean lived in Geneva. It was an oil boom town. And it was a wild and woolly town. One newspaper, this is true, said that at that time, Geneva was the roughest place east of the Mississippi because of all the oil men who poured in from all over the country for this boom. And at the height of the oil boom, there were 650 oil wells pumping in Adams County, and they were pumping out that year over 1.5 million barrels of oil. So this was huge. A windstorm went through the area in late 1895, and the newspaper reported 69 oil derricks in the immediate Geneva area were blown over. So it was big, and those two things destroyed the Limberlost. But we can now say the Limberlost lives again because we have almost 1,800 acres of Limberlost Conservation Area Nature Preserve. There's the historic site in Geneva. So we have the Swamp Preserve, the Lobline Marsh Preserve, Music of the Wild, the Bird Sanctuary, Rainbow Bend Park up in here. And we're not just creating some new areas and calling them Limberlost to cash in on the name. You'll see here, the red there is the modern nature preserves over the old map of the original Limberlost wetland area. So in fact, we are bringing it back. And not only is the state and the Friends of the Limberlost our support group who own some of these properties, we're not the only ones doing this with individual landowners setting aside properties, both forested and wetland areas. There's actually over, at least 3,500 acres in that area that are being restored back to the original area. So it's not just these. There's other areas too. They're not open to the public, but they're there, just providing habitat, like our farmers were doing here, providing habitat for wildlife and that sort of thing. Good for you. Now, all these have nature trails on them. This is just an example. This is Lobline Marsh Nature Trails, a couple miles of trails there. That's our most popular one. More people go there than any other. That was the first one created, modern one created in 1997. The Bird Sanctuary was created in 1947 when the Limberlost Academy became a state property. And I'm inviting you all to come visit with me. Bring your money though, because I have a rent to naturalist program. For $40, you and I go out for 90 minutes to 2 hours. I don't watch my watch all that closely. And that's not $40 a person, that's $40. You can be by yourself and pay $40, you can bring 15 people with you and you pay $40. So you get a hold of me, give us a call, send me an email or something, and it's a personalized tour. I take into account your physical abilities because we do have an ADA trail in the marsh. I've done wheelchair rent to naturalists. And I take into account what your interests are. If you're into flowers, we'll look at flowers. If you want to know history, we'll do history. If you want to see the spots Jean Transporter wrote about, we'll do that. It's your tour. And come on down and explore Jean Transporter's world, land of the Limberlost. So you got to go out and about with this dashing old man. I used to say dashing young man, but I can't do that anymore. So that's one of our giant sycamore trees out in Rainbow Bend Park. Jean called these trees in the area known as Rainbow Bottom the giants of Rainbow Bottom. And you can see why. I mean, it's not a record or anything. That's a big tree. See how it's kind of hollow there? Before COVID came along, I used to invite people to crawl in there with me. And I've had 6 adults and 2 kids in there, all from the same family. Not like I just invited strangers, okay, you and you and you. No, but, you know, it's all packed in there. We were kind of like sardines, but we got 8 people in there. So, you know, that's what masks are for now. We can wear our masks and still go inside. So anyway, y'all can come out and about and explore the Limberlost with me. And not only do I want you to come to the Limberlost, but there's one other person who would like you to come to the Limberlost. You know her. There she is. Jean Stratton-Porter. She wants you to visit the Limberlost. So, if I have time, Penny, I can take questions. I guess I have time. And it's not, you know, maybe you get to go home early today because I'm not. Anyway, anybody have any questions about anything I talked about, or anybody have a little bit of information? Like, you know, Bobby was telling me things I didn't know. And anybody else? Y'all from Wabash County, you may know things about Jean Stratton-Porter's early days, or have family members who stashed away. And here's a quick example. Just yesterday, we got from someone, a relative who died, and they had made a scrapbook, a little scrapbook. And in that scrapbook were the original letters that they had written, this is from some years back, to Jean Stratton-Porter's daughter, Jeanette. And Jeanette had written back, so we have the original letters that were sent back and forth between these 2 people. And it was in a scrapbook somebody had because they were a fan of Jean Stratton-Porter. So you just never know what might be stashed away. You know, he was saying his mother had all his books, you know, some were signed, which is awesome. You don't see a huge amount of signed books. So, you know, dig around in your attic and see what you can find for us. Questions? Comments? No?
I saw one of the Jean Stratton, or one of the Girl of the Limberlost movies. I don't know who produced it or anything, but in that movie, it seemed like the girl had a rather strained relationship with her mother. Is there any truth to that? Or?
Yeah, that's one of the things. Sometimes Jean's accused of having, you know, goody-goody characters who are too good to be true. And I found that those people must not have read the same book I read, although there is some very not good people in there, but they go through the usual stuff that we all go through in our lives. And in fact, in the first part of Girl of the Limberlost, Elnora, who is the girl of the Limberlost, she's a teenage girl. Her mother hates her, because, I'm not giving away too much here if I say this. You're going to want to say, why does she hate her? Because when Elnora's mother was pregnant, full term, with Elnora's father fell into a swamp sinkhole and started sinking and yelled for help, and his pregnant wife came out to try to get him out of the sinkhole in the swamp behind their house. And right then, she went into labor. And her husband drowned. And so she blamed her daughter for the death of her husband. So yeah, it's a pretty bad relationship, actually, between Elnora and her mother. Now, you know, you got to read the book to find out more what happens, but so you can't say Jean always had characters who were all goody two-shoes all the time. That's just not the case, no. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Yes?
Do you know about the original Stratton house? The story I have is it was burnt, and if you look at the foundation, it looks like maybe the other house, the new house, was built on the old foundation. Do you know anything about that part of it?
All I know really is that the house that Jean grew up in, the one I showed you all there, burnt down. Jean was going to purchase it when she got rich, but it had already burned down by that time. So she was unable to buy her. If she had, you know, that y'all might have another museum here in Wabash County. Birthplace of Jean Stratton-Porter, right? That'd be pretty cool, but it wasn't meant to be. Yeah, I'm not sure about a first house burning down. I mean, you know, Bobby knows more about the previous landowners than I do. His whatever.
That's what I was referring to, was the house that she grew up in.
Right.
It burned down.
Yes.
And then
There's a new house there now.
built on it, and it looks like it might be the original foundation.
It could be. I can't speak to that. It's the kind of thing I like to learn about when I come out to places like this, because, you know, like that, I don't know some of these details that you guys may be more familiar with than I am, since I don't live in Wabash County. All right, who else has a question? Yes?
1977, I think, September, I was on fire department. We bought a house
Did you?
And so I don't think too many years ago, but we did fight a house fire, Steve ordered the house that was on the property at that time.
Does anyone know, is there a house there now? Is there a current house on that old, where the Hopewell house was? Anybody not know that? I didn't drive by, I went to the Hopewell Cemetery briefly today, I've been there before.
Yeah, Steve Grossman lives there.
Okay, so that Steve Grossman lives where the Hopewell house used to be, okay? Cool. All right, anybody else have anything? I knew I'd get questions, I actually wore both my hearing aids today, so I can hear y'all. Normally I just wear one, that's all I usually need, but this time, you're special, so you deserve 2 hearing aids. Too much construction of grain bins when I was a teenager. My dad worked for Farm Bureau Co-op. I grew up on a hog farm in central Illinois until I was 14. We lived at a hog farm grain elevator that my uncle owned. And we moved to northwest Indiana, and my dad worked for Farm Bureau Co-op, so in my summers I worked building first Chief grain bins. Anybody remember the old Chief grain bins? Yeah. Then I was, there you go. You're showing your age, man. And then some Brock bins also. So yeah, I was inside there in those days. That you didn't wear hearing protection, and you're tapping away with impact wrenches, tightening bolts up. Only about a zillion million of them as you, over the summer, 3 summers. So I don't hear so good anymore. I don't smell so good either, but that's a different story. I didn't mean that the way it came out. All right, anybody else have any questions or comments or teach me something? No? Well, hey, I guess we got it. So, thank you very much.